You're welcome to study session 4, the philosophy of perception. Introduction. In this study session, we will examine philosophical perception and its principles. Also, we will discuss the theories of perception and factors that influence it. Define and use correctly the following terms in bold: perception, detection, recognition, discrimination. 2. Outline the process of perception. 3. Explain the principles of perception. 4. Discuss factors that influence perception. 5. Explain the theories of perception in epistemology. What is perception? The process by which we observe and find meaning in objects, events, and people around us can be described as perception. Put in another way, perception is the process of acquiring, interpreting, selecting, and organizing sensory information. Methods of studying perception range from essentially biological or physiological approach through psychological approaches to the often abstract thought experiment of mental philosophy. Our knowledge of the world comes through our sense organs, which react to various forms of energy and physical signals. Our eyes respond to certain wavelengths of light. Our ears sense certain kinds of vibrations in the air. Nose and tongue are sensitive to certain chemical signals. Sense organs in our skins respond to pressure, temperature, and pains. Sense organs in our joints, tendons, and muscles respond to body movement and positions. Level of perception. In order for us to better understand perception and its processes, we need to look at the level of perception and its complexities. Perception has 3 levels of complexity. These are detention, recognition, and discrimination. 1. Detention. Detention refers to whether people can sense that they are being stimulated by some form of energy. For example, a light may be dim that people can barely see it. 2. Recognition. Recognition means being able to identify as well as detect a particular pattern of stimulation. 3. Discrimination. Discrimination means being able to perceive patterns of stimulation as different. For example, a person may hear slight differences between 2 similar musical tones. Processes of perception. The process of perception can be described in the following ways. Sense organs change in the various physical signals into nervous impulses, and these impulses then travel to the brain. Through the physical process of perception, the patterns of signals come to exist in our minds as objects, events, people, and other aspects of the world. Perception involves an active process of working on sensory data to produce objects and events. This work involves many physical and psychological factors. For example, there is music or noise in the vibrations that stimulate the ear. The brain organizes and interprets nervous impulses from the ears as sound. Together, the sense organs and the brain transform physical energy from sound waves and other environmental stimuli into information about events around us. The philosophy of perception is concerned with how mental processes and symbols depend on the world internal and external to the perceiver. Our perception of the external world begins with the senses, which lead us to generate empirical concepts representing the world around us within a framework relating new concepts to pre-existing ones. Perception therefore leads to an individual's impression of the world. A major issue in the philosophy of perception is the possibility of discrepancy between external world and the perceiver's impressions, which are sometimes referred to as qualia. The questions that should come to mind at this point are: do our perceptions allow us to experience the world as it really is? Can we ever know another person's point of view the way we know our own? Having examined the definition of perception and the processes of perception, we should note that perception does not operate in isolation. There are factors affecting perception, principles of perception. There are a number of general principles that helps us understand the processes of perception. One of such principles is the principle of closure. Closure is the general psychological tendency to perceive things as complete and unified. Another principle is the principle of constancy. The principle states that we tend to perceive objects as constant in size, shape, color, and other qualities in spite of changes that occur in stimulation. For example, an orange will be perceived to have its characteristic color under different kinds of light. The opposite of the principle of constancy is also important. Sometimes, an object or pattern of stimulation will remain constant, but the perceived effect will vary. For example, look at the gray and black colors of any perceived object. Let's say a cube. At one moment, you may see 3 complete cubes, but at another moment, you may see 5. Another important principle relates to perceptual context. The perception of an object or event depends in part of the context, that is, surrounding conditions. Factors influencing perception. Both physical and psychological factors affect perception. One of the most important physical factors is the structure of human nervous system. Important psychological factors include our emotions, needs, expectations, and learning. 1. The nervous system. Each sensory system, such as vision, hearing, or touch, has its specialized detectors. These detectors are called receptors, and they function in various ways to change energy into nervous impulses. For example, the human eye has 2 major kinds of receptors in the retina, that is, the light-sensitive part of the eye. These receptors are called rods and cones. Rods and cones each contain particular chemicals that respond to light in different ways. As a result, rods detect shapes, movement, and shades of gray, but do not respond to colors. Cones detect the full range of color by responding to different frequencies of light. These differences in structure and function help determine the perception effect related to rods and cones. Rods enable us to see in dim light, and cones enable us to see colors and sharp details in bright light. 2. The brain. Certain physical and functional features of the brain also influence perception. The part of the brain that interprets visual signals has different kinds of cells that respond only under certain conditions. Some of these cells respond only when a light is lit, but they stop responding if the light stays on. Others respond only when a light turns off. These cells are also arranged in special ways that are related to how we perceive. For example, some cells occur in columns or in clusters that are related to how we perceive edges and forms. 3. Learning, emotion, and motivation. Much evidence supports the conclusion that learning, emotion, and motivation are important influences on perception. Part of this evidence comes from experiments that compare our people in different cultures perceive things. The perception of form, color, pain, touch, and other experiences may differ from culture to culture depending on habits, customs, and training of children. Visual effects, called illusions, can also demonstrate the influence of learning and past experience. An illusion is not a false perception, as many people believe, but one that is inconsistent with another perception. 4. Emotions and motivations. These two can have important influence on perception. At times, severe emotional disturbance can prevent perception completely. For example, some people who are robbed are unable to remember anything about the appearance of the robber. Motivation can also affect the way we perceive. For example, food may seem unusually large or colorful to hungry people. Theories of perception. Realism. In modern philosophy, realism is applied to the doctrine that ordinary objects of sense perception, such as tables and chairs, have an existence independent of their being perceived. In broad terms, realism is concerned generally with the relation of knowledge to its object. Hence, the question of sense perception is of utmost importance. More often than not, philosophers make a distinction between direct realism and indirect realism. Direct realism assumes that what is consciously given to us in perception are the real thing or the things themselves. Indirect realism, on the other hand, regards what is immediately given in consciousness as no more than a copy of the real thing. In essence, one can say that realism undoubtedly expresses man's attitude to the knowledge he possesses. An extreme version of realism is known as naive realism. This theory of perception holds that the things perceived by the sense are believed to be exactly what they appear to be. There is the belief that there is a real external world and that our perceptions are caused directly by that world. It has its foundation in causation because an object being there causes us to see it. Thus, it follows that the world remains as it is when it is perceived. When it is not being perceived, a room is still there once we exist. Reality here is taken to correspond exactly to what is perceived. Anti-realism. There are two variants of anti-realism. These are idealism and phenomenalism. Idealism holds that we can only be aware of mental things. It is an anti-realist theory of perception which holds that knowledge is derived from ideas. This version of anti-realism holds that the reality consists of only minds and ideas. Eliminative realist, for instance, holds that there is no such thing as material objects. They are nothing but experiences in our minds, ideas, or sensations. Reductive idealist, on the other hand, holds that there are material objects, but they are nothing other than complexes of experience. One of the most influential proponents of reductive idealism was Bishop Berkeley, who maintained that everything was mind-dependent. He reduced all physical objects to ideas either in the mind of God or the mind of human being. Phenomenalism. Phenomenalism claims that statements regarding physical objects can be translated into statements about what was, is, and would be experienced under certain conditions. To say, for instance, that a physical object of a certain type exists is to say that certain sort of sense data have been, are being, and would be experienced under certain conditions. In Ayer's terminology, phenomenalism claims that physical objects are logical constructions and their objects are sense data. This does not mean that physical objects are constructions of sense data, for such a view will be similar to the view held by idealism. But the central idea of phenomenalism is that the content of propositions about physical objects can be translated without loss into propositions about sense data. There are two famous defenses of phenomenalism: Mill's phenomenalism and Ayer's linguistic phenomenalism. Mill's phenomenalism. Mill derived his account from empiricism about ontological questions, that is, what there is, and his associate psychology. We have only our experience to go on in establishing what there is. He famously describes physical objects as permanent possibility of sensation. When we come in contact with physical objects, for example, when we are looking at something on a desk, we are presented with a series of new sensations. Certain sensations which are possible come about, I could move this piece of paper and experience a new shape of the color beneath it. These are all sorts of possible sensations that would occur under certain conditions. We have come from experience to expect this sequence of sensation. You could say that we are certain it will happen. And so we come to think of certain possibilities of sensation as being permanently available under certain conditions. The certainty we have is not unwarranted. It is grounded in our experience. We associate the permanent possibilities of certain sensations together, since whenever I have one, the conditions of having another associated with it are to hand. These clusters of possible sensations are what physical objects are. A piece of paper is a permanent possibility of certain sensations that we associate together. Only some of the sensations in fact occur, but the physical object is a collection of those that do and those that could occur. Ayer's linguistics phenomenalism. Ayer makes a different case. He defends phenomenalism through his analysis of statements concerning physical objects. He claims that the function of philosophy is to give definitions in use, showing how the sentences in which a symbol or type of symbol, that is, such as words for physical objects, occur, can be translated into equivalent sentences that do not contain it or its synonyms. He contrasts this with dictionary definitions in which symbols are defined in terms of synonyms. Philosophical definitions, then, can deepen our understanding of terms in a way dictionary definitions do not. That is, they can still be informative to someone who already knows what all the terms mean in the dictionary sense. Our initial understanding of terms may amount to no more than practical ability to use them and know how to verify them. But philosophical analysis can reveal unsuspected logical complexity. Since the analysis translates sentences containing the term under analysis into sentences that do not, we come to see how the term is standing in for something more complex. Such terms denote logical constructions. The introduction of symbols, which donate logical constructions, is a device which enables us to state complicated propositions about the element of these constructions in a relatively simple form. Study session summary. In this study session, we examined philosophy of perception and the principles of perception, which led us to how we can better understand perception and its processes. We also examined the factors that affect perception, after which we identified 3 theories of perception which are central to any discourse on perception. We have come to the end of study session 4. Thanks for listening.